Senator Rand Paul joins us on News Radio 840 WHAS. Senator Paul, thanks for coming on the program. I'm sure you have a reaction to what happened in Orlando.
Good morning, Leland. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think, anytime you see horrific, senseless violence, we all have sort of this revulsion and also this wondering, how could someone do this? How could someone, go in and just shoot 100 people and kill nearly 50 people? So, I think it's very difficult to understand this, and I guess I look at it in the larger sphere of things of, how are we going to protect our country from terrorism? And there's not an easy answer, but I think that we need to be wary of those who want to make this a gun control issue instead of an issue about Islamic terrorism.
Well, let's talk about the president's speech yesterday, because the president seems to me, anyway, that the only time he's ever passionate is when he's lecturing us about how things like this are our fault. He droned on and on about whatever successes of ISIS, and then when he got to the subject of guns and the subject of how awful people like you are, boy, he got animated, and it was like suddenly we knew who the enemy was, and it was not the terrorist who struck us. It was people on your side of the aisle.
Well, I think it is very important to remember that the only people ultimately responsible for terrorists are terrorists. That the people to blame for this killing is the man who performed the killing and the ideology that motivated him. But I think it's also important to look and see whether or not government did a good job at trying to prevent this. So the FBI had investigated him at least twice for making threats to other workers at his workplace. They investigated him once for having had communications with a suicide bomber. And then it turns out also, I think he traveled to Saudi Arabia a couple times. So you have all of those things, and apparently if you're under an FBI investigation for terrorism, you do get put on a watch list, and the FBI gets notified if you buy a gun. And that's what the current policy is now. The problem in this case is Obama's FBI decided to terminate the investigation and say, well, we don't have enough evidence to convict him or to charge him. But the thing about it is that doesn't mean you have to end the investigation. It may mean that you need to extend the investigation, because I think they dropped the investigation before he went to Saudi Arabia. They also dropped the investigation before he purchased the guns. So either one of those things would have tipped them off had they kept him under investigation. So this is what I've been trying to tell people for years. I'm for targeted investigation of people we have individualized suspicion for. I just don't want them, looking at everybody's records in the whole U.S. or considering everybody to be a terrorist. I want them to do targeted, appropriate investigations of people for whom we have suspicion. And in this case, we really should be asking the Obama administration, why did they discontinue the investigation here?
Well, and it's my understanding that they discontinued it because they ran out of time to prove that something was going on.
But apparently that's not a law.
Right, they can get an extension, and they didn't.
Well, and I think there's no limit to the extension. So, for example, if you're head of the FBI and you look at this case, you can ask for 6 more months.
Right.
At the end of 6 months, you can ask for 6 more months. The reason this has to be discussed, and this is probably way more important than any kind of gun control, is remember the Boston bombers,
right,
the Sonarif boys. They both had been investigated, but the investigation was closed, or we didn't do an adequate investigation because we didn't realize one of them had flown back to Chechnya.
Right.
So this is the same sort of question. Are we closing these investigations too early? And there is a difference between having enough evidence to charge or convict and to investigate. But as much as I'm a believer and a huge defender on innocent until proven guilty and you can't convict people without evidence, I'm not against investigating people for whom we have individualized suspicion.
Right.
So I would have done longer and more thorough investigation of the Boston bombers before the bombing, but the same with this guy. And so if we want to prevent terrorism, we need to tell the FBI that, when things are adding up and you, in your mind, are very, very suspicious this guy is going to be a terrorist, even if you cannot get conviction at this time, maybe the request should be for an extended investigation.
Well, I'm with you up to this point, but let me ask you, I'm concerned because your colleague in the Senate is going to meet with FBI today and with Department of Homeland Security today as well. And now Trump has said he's going to meet with the NRA and discuss this. And the president has called for making a no-fly, no-buy list. There's about maybe 1 million people on the no-fly or the terrorist watch list. We have no idea how they get on the list. We have no idea how to get off the list. We have no due process. Isn't that kind of scary to be considering now, even on the Republican side, the idea of taking away people's Second Amendment rights without any due process? It's one thing to watch. It's another thing to stop them from actually being able to exercise those rights.
Right. Well, there's a couple different lists. There's one list that has, I think, nearly 1 million people on it, and that's a watch list. There's another list that I think only has about 1,000 people on it, and that's a no-fly list. And so I think what we voted on last December is I did vote for the ability for people who are on a terrorist watch list to have their gun rights removed, but they would have to have a procedure. Basically, have to go before a judge. There has to be a due process proceeding where there is evidence presented and there is a conclusion by a judicial proceeding that they indeed are, or there's a high probability that they are. So we don't just willy-nilly do it.
But in a secret court? Where I can't defend myself?
I don't believe this was a secret court. I think it would be an open court, and that would be my preference always, is to do it in an open court.
Yeah, I mean, because I think
there is a big difference between the lists, though. One is an enormous list, and one is a list of probably less.
But the president doesn't differentiate between them when he talks to the American people about it, and this is what worries me, because you got everybody and everybody's uncle is now jumping on this bandwagon, and I'm hearing from people that are conservative who think this is such a great idea. They don't understand the difference between the list.
The thing to keep in mind is we have to realize, do you trust President Obama to make a list like this? So
I don't trust you to make it. I mean, Senator Paul, I love you to death, but I don't trust you to make the list. I don't trust anybody in government to make the list.
When we look at some of the definitions of what they have called terrorism, we have to be quite a bit concerned if your rights will be taken away without a trial. So, for example, the Department of Justice a few years ago came out with a list of criteria that could put you on a list. These were missing fingers, stains on your clothing, changed your hair color recently, has weatherized ammunition or multiple guns in the house. So if those are the definition of a terrorist, we ought to be pretty concerned about having our Second Amendment rights taken away without a trial. So, but the first thing to understand is there's two lists. There's one with like 1 million people on it. That's a watch list. Then there's a no-fly list, which has 1,000 people. So the question is we do need to have due process to take away if we're going to take away guns from terrorists, which we should all want to do. Same way if you're a convicted murderer, we want to, you don't really keep your right to have guns at that point. And so what we need to do is make sure that there is a due process proceeding, and that's what we've been asking for, is that everybody, wants terrorists to be prevented from having guns. But had they continued the FBI investigation of this guy, this Omar Mateen, the FBI would have been tipped off when he bought guns. The reason they weren't tipped off is the FBI prematurely stopped the investigation. Right. And they'll say, "Oh, we can't investigate everybody." Well, they can continue to keep investigations open, and with it open, they would have known that he had begun to stockpile weapons.
Yeah. Don't you think that it's kind of scary that we've got these lists? I mean, like you said, there's two lists. I mean, what is the authority of the government on the 1 million people list? Versus, I mean, you kind of explained if you're on the no-fly list, but what about the 1 million people that are on the watch list? What's the authority of the government there? I mean, the Department of Homeland Security's Jay Johnson said about a month ago that the right-wing terrorists are just as much of a danger. I don't know anybody on the right side that's blowing up buildings and shooting 50 people right now, but that's what they think. Are we on lists?
I think the vast majority of people, and I don't know how much is classified or what is classified, but I think the vast majority of people on the watch list, the big one, the 1 million person watch list, are not U.S. citizens, are not here.
Right.
They're terrorists. So there does need to be some kind of list,
differentiation,
surveillance, and information of those who live around the world who want to attack us. Because, for example, like on 9/11. Had we done a better job with having an international watch list of terrorists, people who were suspected in, bombings in Africa, bombings in Indonesia, they're basically like, these are people who have been investigated. If we could catch them, we would arrest them in trial, but they're somewhere overseas or lurking about the world. We do need to have them on a list so they don't get on a plane to come over here. So I'm not completely against having lists like that.
Right.
But when you come to the Bill of Rights, when you come to take away someone's Second Amendment right to bear arms, we cannot have a list that President Obama develops in secret or takes to a secret court or just bases it on. See, he's doing this to veterans. He's also doing this to senior citizens. They are just probing through all the government data banks And if you were doing, let's say you've become the counsel for your parents and you've become their attorney because they're getting older and they want you to help them with their legal affairs, he's combing through that. And if he finds that someone's transferred their rights in that way, he's taking away their gun rights automatically.
Right.
And that's a real problem. And these people should not have their rights taken away from them without a court saying that it's going to happen.
Are you confident that your colleagues will hold the line on this?
I think we did in December. We had this vote in December. And the interesting thing is that we need to look at where the problem is. The problem is the FBI didn't have him on any list. So let's say we pass new legislation and say we're going to take away gun rights from people on a list with no due process, which I don't think is going to happen. But let's say we do. Would that have stopped this shooting? No, this guy wasn't on any list. The way you want to get this guy on any kind of list or anybody's radar is you got to keep the investigation open. Yeah. So really, if you go back to 9/11, most of the reasons there were, according to Senator Bob Graham, who wrote a book called Intelligence Matters, there were 11 different times we could have stopped 9/11.
Yeah.
11 different huge failures by law enforcement. Now, people will make mistakes, but we should try to fix those kind of mistakes. Yeah. Instead, what we did is we passed the Patriot Act. We have blanket bulk surveillance of all Americans, innocent, mostly innocent, and we decided to go that route instead of saying, why don't we get the FBI to do a better job? Yeah. So really the answer to this Omar Mateen mass murder should have kept the investigation open longer. Yeah. So the FBI needs to be told, ask for a waiver, keep the investigations open, and you probably would have stopped this guy.
I agree. Senator Paul, I got to run, but I appreciate you taking the time today. Fascinating conversation. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, Leo.
All right, Senator Rand Paul.